When I was diagnosed with diabetes in my late 20s, I was told that it was chronic, that it was not reversible, that you couldn't stall it, you couldn't really treat it any way other than with medications.
Ron, how did you find Carnivore?
I found Carnivore simply by accident, really. I stumbled across it when I was on YouTube. I had been investigating nutrition, and a video by Thomas Dallar uh, showed up, and I found it very intriguing. And then after that, I fell down the rabbit hole and just started watching all of these YouTube videos about the keto diet, which I had never heard of before. And I was 61. So I had been through just about every diet in my life because I've been struggling with obesity since I was a child. I went on my first diet when I was 12 years old. And so I went through all of these diets sort of on a yo yo cycle, that hunger brain connection that was always occurring and always causing me to fail on these diets. And many of them were very extreme, like one, you only ate fruit. And I was on the Atkins diet, which was semi successful for me at the time, but I was in college. I was very active. And I tried just about everything to fight obesity. Um, I didn't know that I was diabetic until I was in my late 20s. And I really didn't know anything about diabetes. And so I've
Sorry,
been on
type 2 diabetes.
type 2 diabetes and extreme obesity at times. Um, I've been on the keto diet now for 6 years, and uh, I lean toward the carnivore diet. So I'm quite honestly more a ketovore. Um, so I eat meat, eggs, and dairy. And then I also allow myself a few plant foods like coconut and avocado, and then a few keto products most recently, which include like keto breads and making recipes that include almond flour. And I never really got off the zero carb sweeteners. I use those quite a bit. They don't seem to bother me. My inflammation markers are pretty low. So I guess my lifelong struggle with obesity was always centered around the weight and the weight loss. And food has always been a central part of my life. I like to cook. I like to cook for others. And I was always the biggest kid in my class when I was growing up. Um, I was chunky. I see pictures of myself as a child, and I wasn't really, really obese. But I always seemed to be the biggest kid on the block for my age. And I was, when I was diagnosed with diabetes in my late 20s, I was told that it was chronic, that it was not reversible, that you couldn't stall it, you couldn't really treat it any way other than with medications. And I was given the typical standard medical advice of uh, exercise more and eat less. So the energy balance theory, which I believe is not really applicable in a major way to a complex biological system like the human body. Um, my uh, uh, experience with dieting was that I could stay on it for about a month or so, but at some point I had to cheat. I had to fail. And then I couldn't really understand all through my life why everybody else could eat whatever they wanted, however much they wanted, and not suffer the effects of obesity. And I, I of course only saw those people. When I saw other fat people, I just thought, well, they're in the same boat I am, and uh, it's going to lead to diabetes, and it's there's nothing we can really do about it. And every time a doctor, since I started the keto diet, has suggested to me that the keto diet is dangerous and the worst diet in the world because it's high in fat, um, and that we need carbs, which of course we don't really need carbs. Our bodies can make carbs if they need them. Um, but uh, my response to that is simply, how's that going for everybody? Because we are more obese and more sick and have more heart disease and more cancer and more neurological diseases than we ever have. And that started to spike up in the 60s. And what happened in the 60s? They changed our nutritional advice to stop eating red meat, especially. Red meat was the villain. Um, and red meat comes from cows. And if cows didn't have those long eyelashes and were made to look cute, we would never accuse cows. What's wrong with chickens and fish? And I guess we can eat all that. But no red meat, no red meat. That's going to give you a heart attack. And the criticisms I've received about being on a high fat, moderate protein, very low carb diet was simply that I was going to have a heart attack. And I don't have heart disease. I've been on keto for 6 years now. Um, and I have really conquered my obesity for the first time in my life for long term. Um, and I guess the irritating thing for me is that a low carb diet was never suggested by any health professional, any doctor, and as a result, when I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, I was following what they told me. Now, I've used critical thinking skills all of my life. I've been a manager of businesses, bookstores. Specifically, I had my own bookstore for 17 years before I retired because of my chronic diabetes. Uh, and I was told that you needed to take insulin. First, I took glyburide pills, and then eventually those became ineffective. I was up to the maximum dose. And then they said, well, now you need to start injecting insulin. And so I did that because I was told that was the treatment. Um, However, what happened because of the high insulin was a lot of damage to my body. Insulin is a necessary hormone, but it is also the fat storage hormone. That's sort of its main function. And what resulted was I continued to gain weight uh, unbeknownst to me, the insulin continued to cause a lot of the hyperinsulinemia was causing a lot of damage to my body. But that is chalked up by medical professionals simply as having diabetes in the first place. And you take insulin to lower your blood sugar, which it does. But at the same time, it creates this high insulin in your blood, causing a lot of damage. So that was what was going on in my body. And eventually, my kidneys failed. Both of my kidneys failed. And I had to go on infusions on dialysis. So that took 3 or 4 days a week. I would go in, and it's a 3-hour procedure. You get stuck with big needles. It's not pleasant at all. Um, you're in close quarters with a lot of other people who are in the same boat. They don't have functioning kidneys. I was going to a kidney institute for my dialysis. And I did that for 9 years. So that's a long time on dialysis, but some people have to do it for the rest of their lives. Um, and the the process was very debilitating. I would go to dialysis, which took the big chunk out of the middle of my day. I couldn't really work. And the next day I was weak, feeling weak and exhausted. And then the next day I had to go back in for dialysis. So the my obesity increased because I was still on the standard American diet. The only thing they told me to do was to, of course, exercise more, eat less, don't, and because of the water retention, when your kidneys shut down, you can't pee anymore. So your bladder is not being filled by your kidneys, and that was what was happening to me. So that's the requirement for dialysis, is to remove the excess water from your body and to filter it. So um, as a result of all of this insulin, I began to gain more and more weight, and I went up to 365 pounds. Um, a year after I started uh, um, dialysis, um, I had my left leg amputated below the knee because of the infections, the sores, the ulcers, and because of Charcot syndrome, which is where your bones, no, because of the nerve damage from neuropathy, the bones no longer know which direction to grow. So uh, it causes instability in the foot and allows all sorts of things to start happening. And eventually, I couldn't really feel my feet anymore, and I took off my left shoe, and my foot was all black and purple. And I was rushed to the hospital, and they told me it's time to take off the foot. So they amputated the foot that day. Uh, and so I dealt with that single amputation for about 4 years. And then the same thing happened to my right foot. And so I am a bilateral below the knee uh, amputee. I have no feet. So that is one of the results of the uh, un improperly managed diabetes. So I just want to say that because um, there are consequences to only addressing blood sugar levels and not addressing insulin levels. And no doctor ever measured my insulin. They just saw my blood sugar spiking, and they gave me more and more insulin. And as a result, um, I I was as a result of not addressing the main issue, and that was going upstream from the blood sugar, finding out what is causing high blood sugar. And it's obvious to me now because at that time I didn't question what doctors were advising. I figured they went to school, they were the experts, they had the best information available, and their solution was to use insulin. But of course, what I know now is that uh, you have to go up to what is causing the high blood sugar, not just bringing the blood sugar numbers down. You have to understand what is bringing the blood sugar up in the first place. And one of
That's right.
those,
Because if you
eh,
don't understand what's upstream, then you're not really treating the problem. You're just kind of effectively passing a test, right?
right, you're just treating a symptom. And in effect, what you're really doing is just covering your mouth when you cough, because those numbers are good indicators, but they're not addressing the root cause. And the root cause is, of course, carbohydrates. Because when I ate carbohydrates, my blood sugar would go up. And their solution, more insulin, bring your blood sugar down. And the high blood sugars cause a lot of damage. The high insulin causes a lot of damage. And when you don't address what causes the high blood sugar, you're not addressing the insulin resistance. You're not addressing the actual disease or dis-ease of type 2 diabetics. Type 1 diabetics are in a completely different boat, and they really have to be addressed as two different diseases. They can't be addressed the same. And there's a lot of current research that is indicating, and even past research that we've known about for decades, that high blood sugar affects the brain. And we also know that there's a brain uh, appetite cycle. When your blood sugar goes up and then goes down, you get hungry. And that cycle continues. And your body says, well, your brain is telling you, go get more sugar to bring that blood sugar back up. So it's up and down and up and down. And we always address the spikes with insulin, but we really don't address the lows. And the low is what causes me to eat and be hungry and to break every single diet, including a vegetarian diet that I was almost on for almost a whole year. And quite frankly, I was never sicker than when I was on a vegetarian diet. It was really poison for me. And I suffered a lot of um, uh, headaches, indigestion, diarrhea, um, vomiting. Uh, and finally, I just had to go back to eating the standard American diet because that's all I really knew about. And that's what everybody else was eating. So that's what I did. And as a result of diabetes, I lost both of my lower legs. I lost the vision in my right eye. I had a massive hemorrhage because of the high blood sugar in my right eye. So I only have about 75% vision in that eye, and the total kidney failure. So um, I was up to 365 pounds, and I went in for my yearly checkup the with my doctor, and he said, "You're not going to get a kidney at 365 pounds." My siblings were tested. My sister had uh, was was ineligible, as was my brother. They were both hypoglycemic. And my sister had rheumatic arthritis. Um, and so they were both ineligible, although they did offer to give me a kidney. I'm glad they didn't, um, because they are now struggling with their own health issues. And my brother has become full on diabetic and obese. And he was not obese when he was young. And so I went up to 365 pounds, and they told me, you're not getting a kidney at that weight. So I, I was advised to get a lap sleeve gastrectomy, which is, it used to be called stomach stapling, but they stopped, I guess, stapling the stomach. And now they just remove 3/4 of the stomach. And that's what they did with me. So you have the sleeve they're referring to is uh, just that your stomach, which used to be the size of your fist, is now a simple tube. So it's like a sleeve. And when you eat, um, takes a while for your stomach to empty. And when you eat, you can only eat a very small amount because otherwise you throw up. And they call it the foamies, where you're throwing up not the food that you've eaten, but you're throwing up acid, indigestion. Uh, so it's basically just like this foam. Um, and it's horrible. It's a horrible experience. And so, with 3/4 of my stomach gone, I couldn't eat very much, although eventually you learn how to eat around it by, instead of eating 3 meals a day, you eat 6 or 7 tiny meals a day. Um, but I did lose weight. I lost about 80 pounds, and I went down to 285 pounds. So at 285, I went in and they said, no, we need you more like at 245. And so I literally just starved myself. It was my first experience with intermittent fasting, but it was forced, because as soon as that brain cycle took over, I started to eat again. But I literally just starved myself down to 245. I went in, they said, okay, this is doable. They were pressing on my fat in my stomach, and they said this was doable. So I went, um, uh, I went back home. I think I was called 6 times for a transplant. They call you up and they say, we've got a kidney that might be available to you today. So stop eating, um, and we will give you a call and let you know if you qualify and you need to come in for the surgery. 5 times in a row, they called back and said, it's not a match for you. We're giving the kidney to somebody else. And the 6th time they called me and they said, we have a match. And so we'd like you to come in for surgery. Don't eat anything. And I panicked and I immediately ate something before I went into surgery. But I went in and they didn't, that was like at midnight, and they didn't operate until 9 o'clock in the morning. And I didn't tell them I'd had a small bite to eat. So I was afraid that, um, when they qualified me for a kidney at 245, that had been 6 months earlier, and I had gained back a lot of that weight, and I was back up to 285. And I was afraid I would go in and they would weigh me, and then they'd say, oh, no, we can't give you this kidney. But they didn't. They went ahead and gave me the kidney. They never weighed me. Um, so it was a perfect kidney. Um, I didn't have any repercussions from the surgery. 6 days later, I went home, which was sort of unusual. right after the kidney surgery, I started producing urine, and um, because my bladder was the kidney was working really well, and my bladder was starting to fill up with urine, and so I had a catheter for a few days, well, for 6 days until I left the hospital, and then I went home and I was peeing, and I had to measure my pee to report it and everything. And I didn't have any side effects from the medications they gave me at the time. Also, when I was on dialysis, I had back surgery, and I had to have my lower back fused. And the back surgery was because I had been so obese for so long, most of my life. And I had that fat man waddle that you're sort of throwing your legs out to keep you mobile. And it did a lot of damage to my back. So obesity was was the cause of that. And of course, the cause of obesity was the insulin resistance and the hyperinsulinemia, and an effect of type 2 diabetes that is mismanaged. And the way that I came to carnivore after my kidney transplant was that the kidney was from a 12-year-old girl who had died. Um, Unbeknownst to me at the time, eventually we had some contact with the family. And I remember going into surgery and seeing the box that the kidney was transported in, and it said, uh, uh, this kidney has received electrical shock. So I don't know the circumstances of her death. They might have tried to revive her through electrical shock. But I wanted to protect the kidney. It was a gift to me. Uh, and so I started doing nutritional research because I realized that I couldn't continue down the road that I had always taken with the standard American diet or any of these crazy diets I had been on. And so I started to study the nutrition. And when you do that, when I did that, I had to throw out all of what I'd been told about nutrition, um, and start from the basics. And when I discovered keto, um, this Thomas DeLore YouTube video that I saw, I I said, "What the heck is this?" You know, so I went down that rabbit hole. I discovered channels like yours, um, and I followed you and all the people that were talking, and the both the personal interviews like this one as well as the medical experts that all also come on your show, and the keto experts. And so I started following Ken Berry and Dr. Berg, and uh, quite a few YouTubers that do keto and so I said I would try it. I said, okay, I'm going to give myself a month on this and see what happens. And the immediate effect was, of course, my blood sugars started going down by themselves simply by eating meat. Um, and then I would supplement that with the healthy veggies, the low carb veggies, asparagus, cauliflower, broccoli. Um, and after a month, I had lost a significant amount of weight, probably about 15 pounds then. And I knew part of that was water weight. The initial loss in almost all diets is water weight. And I said, well, this is working for me. And I really like bacon and meat. And so I couldn't handle beef very well because my stomach was so small. Um, uh, And I would never at this point recommend that anybody get a lap sleeve gastrectomy because you can't reverse it. You can't grow that stomach back. Um, so what I did was when I was eating beef, it was almost always hamburger, and it was a very small portion. And I know that the diet that I started on keto, which was about 70% fat, 25% protein, and less than 5% carbs. Um, and I found out just by listening to my body that I could handle pork much better than beef because pork isn't quite as dense as beef. And I also liked bacon and sausage and ham. So I didn't have a problem with that. And then after 2 months of being on the diet, that's when it really sort of hit me. This is really working well for me. I had lost over 25 pounds. Um, I began to experience a lot of the um, things like mental clarity. Uh, I woke up one day and I thought, I feel really good being on this diet. And I can think clearly. And my appetite isn't driving me. Um, in fact, there were times that I know that I just didn't want to eat. I was exhausted at focusing on eating, um, and I started focusing on other things. Um, my hobbies, gardening. Uh, I'm a quilter, and I'm also a writer, and I'm working on a novel and a collection of memoirs, narrative essays about my life. Um, and so I began to get distracted away from food. And I also discovered intermittent fasting because I didn't have a name for it before. I just thought it was starving. And I was just starving myself. And the intermittent fasting was a new concept for me. I had to learn a lot about it. I followed Jason Fung, who is probably the preeminent one promoting intermittent fasting, other than carnivore experts who do it quite frequently. Um, and this idea of eat when you're actually hungry sort of took over my life. And I um, I had the way that I succeeded was I had to accept that high glucose foods were not really foods for me. Fruits and vegetables were not really foods for me. I decided to cut out the low carb veggies, which were fresh, and I cooked them myself. But I found that by listening to my body and understanding that every time I ate asparagus, cauliflower, broccoli, um, that I would throw up. I would have a reaction. I started to have a reaction. At first, I didn't, but then I started to have a reaction. As my body became more fat adaptive, it also became more sensitive to the toxins that are in a lot of plants. It's their self defense mechanism. And we still eat a lot of these low toxin foods in the standard American diet, the vegetarian diet, um, because a lot of people can tolerate them um, because the toxins are in relatively low concentrations in the food. And but I couldn't, uh, you know, and so after 2 months, I had to start lowering my insulin doses because I was starting to get low blood sugar. I would wake up every morning and it would be in the 70s or low 80s. which is very low for me. It's normal for some people, but when you've had blood sugars of 500, and been hospitalized, you're basically walking around ready to go into a coma. Um, so I had to lower my insulin dose because and as my body became more and more fat adaptive, I was running off the fat stored in my body and dietary fat. Um, I had to give up the um, the insulin altogether, which was delightful for me because I no longer had to do those injections every day. And I sort of had to sort of whittle down the amount of insulin that I was taking, and eventually it was none. My doctor at the time, I told her that I was on the keto diet because she wanted to know why I was losing weight. And I said, I feel great. Um, and I'm losing weight, but that's not the reason I went on the keto diet. I went on the keto diet to prevent the ultimate destruction of this new pristine kidney that I had. And I I understand that weight loss is just the side effect of being on a healthy keto diet, um, which is great. It's a lifestyle for me. I haven't cheated a single day. I haven't eaten any high glucose foods. Um, and I know that everybody can't do it that way. Everybody has to sort of go into it their own way. And even vegans, they're eating a much healthier diet than the standard American diet because they're getting off a lot of those uh, uh, high processed foods, especially if they're vegan and they're really paying attention to what they're doing. But a lot of them still eat sugar. They'll eat cookies that are vegan, and and that's okay. That whatever works for you is what works. I've recommended the keto diet to several people and encouraged them uh, to learn more about it, but none of them have stayed on it. Um, and I think part of it is they just approach it like another diet, that it's just a weight loss diet. And for me, that's not what it was about. Um, but as a result, um, I am now at this morning I weighed and I was 167 pounds. And remember that I started this uh, by being up to 365 pounds. So my most recent A1C was 5.9, which is still in the pre-diabetic range. Um, 5.9, if most diabetics could get to 5.9, they would be very, very happy. Um, my highest measured um, A1C was over 11. So I've come back down into a more normal range. I am no longer obese. Um, and I think that for all the people who want to criticize the keto diet, I think the best way to convince them that it works for me is success. And I I did have a person react by saying, you can lose too much weight. And she weighs probably 250 pounds. She's never going to give up the sugar. And when I recommend to people, oh, well, if you want to lose weight, if you want to conquer this cycle of sugar addiction, and when I say sugar, I really mean all forms of glucose, not just, they all know that they shouldn't be eating cake and cookies and ice cream, but um, they don't understand that your body can't really tell the difference between a cookie and a slice of bread. when it comes to the amount of carbs that are in it. Both of them make you fat or make me fat. I guess I try to frame it around me and uh, because everybody's not the same. We're all driving different models of cars, and we all operate a little differently. I try to describe to people who think that carb is the main source of energy for your body. Um, I try to tell them the best analogy that I've had is that do you want to be a fuel efficient hybrid electric car, or would you rather just be a high performance race car? And the difference is the high performance race car runs on gas, fossil fuel. Um, and the hybrid runs on a combination of the energy stored in your body. So my body is burning that slow fat burning energy that I've stored in the body or that I eat in my diet. So, and that's the way I put it to them. And a lot of times when you try to describe the ketogenic diet to people, their eyes glaze over. They don't really want to understand science. All they want to know about is results. And I've seen people go on a keto diet, a low carb diet, which for some doctors, a low carb diet is 60 grams of carb a day. I had a friend who went on a low carb diet. So what he would do is fast all day long, and then he would eat 60 grams of carbs plus all the other calories that are involved. Um, and he was never in ketosis. He never got there because he didn't go low enough. I have to really go below 15 carbs a day before I know I'm in ketosis and I'm burning body fat for fuel and the dietary fat that I eat. And I am on a relatively low carb diet because I don't eat that much. I'm 67 now. So that means that I'm not really very active. I've never really been an athlete except for um, the 5 or 6 years that I was doing Taekwondo. Um, and so I don't pursue hiking. I can't run. I can't really hike anymore with my mobility issues. So I just tell people forget everything that you've learned about nutrition because it isn't backed up by science. And vegans have tried to argue nutrition with me. And I just matter of factly say, well, where's your science that backs that up? Now, I can't back up the carnivore diet or the ketogenic diet with a whole lot of science because a lot of it has been hidden and suppressed and simply not done in a good scientific way, comparing people on low carb diets with people on vegan diets or high carb diets. And the high carb diet is a plant based diet. That I think that people don't want to recognize that because they still eat meat. They'll eat a hamburger, but a lot of that stuff with a hamburger is high carb. The bread, uh, the tomatoes, the sauces, it's all high carb. And people don't want to address that because they love hamburgers. They love bread. People always say to me, "Oh, I don't think I could give up bread." I did. So if I can do it, after a lifetime of trying different diets, if I could do it and not have another piece of real bread the rest of my life, anybody could do it. But they've
Yeah.
got to understand what they're doing.
Mm.
Uh,
So, can I just jump in and ask, how has your doctor responded to your latest results when you think your A1C is 5.9? You've lost, I mean, it's basically 200 pounds.
Right. It's
Your doctor should be dancing in the streets. No.
yes, yes, but understanding the restrictions that doctors have. Uh, if doctors go against standard medical advice or treatment, they can lose their license. They can be kicked out of their practice. And my GP is in uh, a standard practice, a collection of doctors, a clinic. Um, so he can't really recommend the low carb diet. He's not allowed. Um, and I have told him if there's anybody who's struggling with type 2 diabetes or obesity, he is free to give my number out to them. He is free to give my email out to them. And I will tell them my story. Um, and it works for me. He doesn't say anything specifically about my diet, although every year when I see him, um, and I only see my doctors once a year, most of them, because I'm doing great. And they don't really need to see me. They're just refilling the few prescriptions that I take. So he doesn't recommend the diet. Um, I've only had one. I The doctor I had before him, she said, "How's it working for you?" And I said, "Great. I'm getting great results." And she says, "Well, good for you." That's all she really said. And she said, "Keep doing what works." Um, and so they can't recommend the diet. The the cardiologist that I saw was kind of interesting because I didn't have a cardiologist. I had moved away from my previous cardiologist, and I don't have any heart disease or heart complications. But at my age, you want to have a cardiologist on your team. So I went to the same one that my husband goes to, and I told him that I was on the keto diet, and his eyes went wide, and he said, "Oh, that's a terrible diet to be on." And I said, "Well, it's really working for me. I've lost a lot of weight, and I'm off insulin and off most of my medications that I was on before." Um, and he said, "Well, it's terrible, terrible. I can't tell you how many people I've cut open and seen the fat all around their heart." So he was speaking from an uneducated viewpoint of the fat in your heart is caused by the fat in your diet, which is not true. Um, and so he just said, "I don't approve of that diet at all." And I said, "Well, what kind of diet do you approve of?" And he said, basically, the Mediterranean diet, the standard American diet. Um, and I said, "Well, how's that working for you? How's that working for your patients?" And he didn't really respond. Doctors are not used to being challenged. They're not used to having people question uh, their treatments. You can accept their diagnosis, but sometimes they're wrong about that. My skin did not clear up until after about a year on keto. Took me a long time, and I still have a couple of skin issues. Um, I had what's it called technically? It's referred to as AK, which is actinic keratosis, which actually is caused by insulin resistance. Um, it showed up on my forearms and was immediately diagnosed as eczema and was treated as such, and it wouldn't go away. And then I saw a different skin doctor, and he said, "This isn't eczema. This is AK." So he treated it properly with a very caustic topical medication that I put on for a few weeks, and eventually it just burned the AK right off my skin, and it has not returned. However, I do, because I grew up in Southern California, never used sunblock and went outside all the time, and my hair was relatively thin instead of being bald like I am now. Uh, I suffered a great deal from the sun exposure of being out in the sun so many, many, many years without sunblock because, in Southern California, there's a lot of pressure. Get a tan, uh, uh, be thin, get a lot of sun. Um, and eventually in my late 40s, I developed skin cancer on top of my head. And um, that was because of the high exposure to the sun. And I still have to treat that. I'm currently treating it. You can't really get rid of that. I've had surgeries on top of my head. It's not lethal because I get it checked twice a year. I get a skin check twice a year, and they usually just freeze off some of the skin tags. Uh, and I've had it on my ears. I've had surgery on my ears to remove it. I've had surgery on the side of my nose. You can't really see a scar there because she did a really great job with that surgery. And I've had it on my neck and the tips of my ears. Those exposures to high concentrations of sun. Um, and the other thing I have is solar purpura, which is purple blotches on my forearms and hands, the backs of my hands and my tops of my forearms, the places that are exposed to the sun. And that kind of heavy sun exposure without sunblock doesn't show up for many years, just like being insulin resistant doesn't show up for many years. Being diabetic doesn't show up. And the effects of a standard American diet doesn't show up until those advanced, uh, that AGE, I forget what that stands for. Advanced,
Advanced glycation end products.
yes. Until those do a lot of damage to your heart. Um, and those are just lipids and proteins surrounded by sugar. And without the sugar, those lipids and proteins that travel around your body and do amazing things, without the sugar glycation, they don't do the damage to your organs, especially your heart.
So, I have I normally have quite a few questions for guests, but I've got one main question for you, given what you've been through. If there's someone watching with type 2 diabetes now, what is your message to them?
My message would be stop believing what they're telling you about type 2 diabetes. Stop believing that insulin is going to uh, affect your diabetes and the progression of breakdown of your body because of the diabetes. Um, that progression can be halted. And the way to do that is to stop raising your blood sugar by eating carbs. And the result of that will be your blood sugars are not high. Your insulin that you produce in your body naturally, which is a requirement, will not be high. The destruction of high blood sugar and high insulin will not occur. If you go upstream and start thinking about what causes the high blood sugar and the release of insulin, or unfortunately, the injection of insulin, uh, stop thinking about that and start thinking about what causes that. And the cause is carbohydrates. And your body doesn't need them. You When you start burning fat, you don't need the energy from carbs. Energy from carbs was designed by our ancestors by our ancestral evolution, I guess I should say, to be immediate energy, immediately available. You could eat nuts and seeds and fruits and some vegetables uh, raw, the things that you could actually eat raw. Um, they were part of our diet in a seasonal way, but biologically we were eating meat all year long, and that's what we should be eating. That's, as they say, the proper human diet. If you want to address your diabetes, address your obesity, you have to go upstream and think about where that destruction comes from. And you have to stop believing everything your doctor tells you. I am very skeptical. So using skepticism is very, very valuable when you want to really address your health, because you have to do it. Nobody's going to do it for you. You have to do it yourself.
Yeah. Very good advice. So, Ron, if people want to reach out to you, how can they get in contact?
I'm not on social media. So the only way they could uh, speak to me would be either comments in the comment section in this uh, video. And I do recommend that people follow and subscribe and click that like button to for No Carb Life. It's a great channel, and you'll hear a lot of stories. And it may address one of the health issues that is not diabetes. So I would suggest that you can either comment or you can reach me by my email. And hopefully, Dave, you can put it in your description section. And it is R White Acre, Aker, 101 at gmail.com. So R Whitaker 101 101 at gmail.com. And I look forward to hearing people. If you're a troll, please don't send me anything. I don't need that toxic stuff in my brain. So
No worries. So, I'll include your email in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on, Ron, and sharing your story. I really appreciate it and happy to hear how well you're doing.
I hope it helps someone. And I think that we just got to keep talking about it, even though it makes
Mm.
you as unpopular as a vegan at a Texas barbecue. You got to get out there and talk to people about it.